1939, Edward Thorndike, influential Columbia University psychologist, wrote, "It is the great good fortune of mankind that there is a substantial correlation between intelligence and morality, including goodwill toward one's fellows. Consequently, our superiors in ability are on the average our benefactors, and it is often safer to trust our interests to them than to ourselves." So most anarchists, punks, skaters, libertarians, teenagers, hippies, hackers, and musicians, this sounds like nonsense. Fuck you for thinking you're smarter and more moral than me and that you should get to run things. The problem is, the ruling class is running things, and they justify that to themselves on account of them thinking that they're smarter and more moral, and we're all too dumb to have a say. Democracy was not what the founding fathers were interested in. The ruling class of 18th century North America was frustrated with burdensome taxes, a ban the British placed on westward expansion, a perceived growing British antipathy toward the institution of slavery, debt accrued by southern planters to the British merchant class, and British monopolistic trade practices, but they weren't that worried about democracy. When the revolution succeeded, the ruling class of the day set to work to establish not democracy, but a system where they could maintain outsized influence over decision making. In Federalist Paper number 10, James Madison wrote, "Those who hold and those who are without property have ever formed distinct interests in society. To protect the property of the few, the aim of government must be to refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interests of their country." That was the Senate, which prior to 1913 was appointed by state legislatures rather than popularly elected. To be clear, it's not like this was some concession made to Madison. Our entire system of government was built to serve the interests of the 18th century ruling class. That's why the Supreme Court is not elected. That's why the Constitution provides a federal framework for property law. That's why the 3/5 compromise happened. According to William Jay, in his biography of his father, John Jay, John's favorite maxim was those who own the country ought to govern it. And this sort of aversion to democratic input can be detected throughout history. As noted, in the mid-20th century, there were mass political uprisings that threatened the deeply hierarchical political and economic order that was centuries in the making by that point. And the ruling class's intelligentsia were incredibly vocal by how uncomfortable they were with the shifting power dynamics those movements were instigating. In 1975, the Trilateral Commission produced a study, The Crisis of Democracy. And it was in part written by Samuel P. Huntington, which expressed fear that the 60s brought in an excess of democracy. And what was needed was, quote, moderation in democracy. Notably, Huntington recalled fondly when, quote, Truman had been able to govern the country with the cooperation of a relatively small number of Wall Street lawyers and bankers. And if you're thinking this must be some marginal think tank producing crackpot psycho-authoritarian shit, Jimmy Carter, his vice president, secretary of state, secretary of defense, secretary of the treasury were all Trilateral Commission members. Richard Nixon would appoint Lewis Powell to the Supreme Court, who in 1971 wrote the infamous Powell Memo, sent confidentially to the Chamber of Commerce, arguing the time has come, indeed it is long overdue, for the wisdom, ingenuity, and resources of American business to be marshaled against those who would destroy it. And we see from there the drastic expansion of the Chamber of Commerce and the establishment of the Business Roundtable, an incredibly well-funded lobbyist organization committed, in their words, to the aggressive pursuit of political power for the corporation. This push for corporate rule is the driving political force behind neoliberalism, and the ideological assumptions that it is rooted in are so resounding that you can hear them as late as 2013 when Hillary Clinton, in the now infamous excerpts from her paid speeches to Goldman Sachs, said, if everybody's watching, all the backroom discussions and the deals, then people get a little nervous, to say the least. least. So you need both a public and a private position.
What I call the basket of deplorables.
That quote, if I didn't tell you, could have been Samuel P. Huntington, Lewis Powell, or John Jay. Part of increased corporate rule in the era of neoliberalism is the organization of elections in such a way that lends themselves to corporate influence. A series of Supreme Court decisions culminating with Citizens United v. FEC in 2010, which overturned 2 rulings that limited corporate speech, effectively gave corporations the right of citizens who are afforded speech protections under the First Amendment of the Constitution, paving the way for unlimited spending on election campaigns. Following Citizens United, super PACs take center stage in our elections. Super PACs being organizations that run independent campaigns for candidates with massive corporate resources. In the decade following Citizens United, super PACs spent almost $3 billion on federal elections. So think about that. The next time someone running for Congress sends you a text asking for $17 leave a comment below telling me which politician has been blowing up your phone recently. Hopefully Nancy Pelosi is watching this and she'll stop texting me. But this effectively handed over the decision surrounding who is in power to the highest bidder. Except for the 1982 Senate elections, between 1980 and 2014, in both the House and the Senate, there was direct correlation between election spending and vote shares held. In that time, strengthening the hold of money over politics, the cost of elections steadily increased. The 2008 election cycle broke records, costing candidates, interest groups, and parties $5.3 billion on the congressional and presidential races. So what does this have to do with Trump? For starters, you and I and people all over the United States know that the ruling class think we're all stupid. And I don't think we like it, because in 2016, when the transcript of Hillary Clinton's Goldman Sachs speech was released, it gave a lot of people someone to point to as really the embodiment of that ruling class ideology. Recall, in 2016, people kept saying it was Hillary Clinton's turn. In fact, staffers even floated the campaign slogan, "Because it's her turn," with the only other option being billionaire Trump. Millions upon millions of people sat the election out. In 2024, the Democratic Party effectively told us it was Kamala Harris's turn when they skipped the primary process and anointed Harris at the Democratic National Convention. And again, millions sat out. Because people don't like, to paraphrase George Carlin, the fact that it is one club and the fact that we are not in it. But further, the mechanisms established by the ruling class to ensure rule by elite were seized by Trump on his path to the presidency. The entire 2016 cycle between the congressional and presidential elections cost $6.5 billion. From 2012 to 2016, the share of contributions that were $200 or less fell by 3.4%, while donations from the top 0.0001% of donors increased from around $390 million to $948 million. Outside groups, consisting mostly of super PACs and nonprofits, spent more than $1.4 billion on the 2016 cycle. While Clinton was the primary benefactor of these organizations, the 2 largest super PACs supporting Trump raised $43.5 million, while when including congressional races, 54% of outside money was spent by conservative groups. Dark money organizations, those with money donated to them by undisclosed donors, spent $181 million, with 76% of that money spent by conservative groups. And there's no need to go into the 2024 election, because as we all know, the richest person in the world dropped $288 million on it to get Trump elected. There's not really any reason to think Musk was wrong when he tweeted that Trump wouldn't have gotten elected without him. So Musk is probably also right about the Epstein thing, right? Like, comment, and subscribe. Publishers like twice in my book.